Our second lesson from the New Testament is from the Gospel according to Luke. This is a passage in which Jesus tells three stories about those who are lost and found. The story of the lost sheep, the story of the lost coin, and this next story, the story of the lost son. Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am, dying of hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, and before you I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now, his elder son was in the field. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command, yet you have never even given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him?' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" Holy wisdom, holy word. Thanks be to God. You should have come to Bible study on Monday. That's all I'm saying. No, that's not all I'm saying. Never before have we had such an energetic discussion. Together, we dove into this story, this perfect jewel of a story, with all the heart and soul and mind and strength of every person in that room. This is Mondays at 4, except for the second Monday, in the downstairs meeting room, for those of you who don't want to miss out. It may or may not surprise you that for most of us in that room, we felt an obvious connection to one of these brothers. And we had a passionate conversation about it. Why, on the one hand, the older brother should, of course, forgive his younger brother, why he should greet him with the same open arms as their father. Because forgiveness is at the heart of our faith. And so, of course, the younger brother deserves our sympathy. And why, on the other hand, some of us just weren't sure we saw actual signs of repentance in that ne'er-do-well younger brother. It just looked like base opportunism to us. And so, of course, the older brother who sees his sibling clearly is the one who really deserves our sympathy. You've already heard the story, so let's fill in some of the details. In Jesus' day, the traditions of inheritance dictated that the oldest son of a family would receive the largest share of the inheritance. Usually, they received a double portion, while all the younger sons received a single portion of the estate. I am sorry to report women were not even in the picture. We learn in the first sentence of the story that there was a man who had 2 sons. So that tells us that when the father divides up his estate, he'd be giving his younger son 1/3 of all his wealth, because the older son gets the double portion, or 2/3 in this case. Even at half what his older brother inherits, he would still have quite a bit of money for his adventures. And adventure he does. The younger son wastes no time. Just a few days later, he packs up all his belongings, leaves for a distant country where we are told in the very same sentence, the whole thing happens in one sentence, that he squanders his property in dissolute living. We don't get the details here, but later on, his older brother is happy to supply them. For now, the Greek behind the English translation means things like wasteful, debauched, even riotous, extravagant, which is the meaning of the word prodigal. And the younger son's timing in all this is such that just as his money runs out, the country he has fled to falls into a mighty famine. And he's forced to take work feeding the pigs on a farm. Now remember, in this Jewish context, pigs are unclean animals. So the young son has been flying high, and now he is brought very, very low. He's desperately hungry, and no one seems to want to offer him a thing. He is so hungry, the pig slop starts to look good to him. And that's when he comes to himself. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever been in the middle of a mess, a horrible situation, a nightmare, at least partially of your own making, in which suddenly you heard a still small voice at the core of your being whispering, hey, you, what are you doing here? And in the memory of the younger son, there swim images of the hired hands back from his dad's land. And they are all gathered around a table, and there is plenty of food for everyone. And then the voice becomes louder and more insistent. Get out, it says. You know what to do. Immediately, the younger son begins to rehearse in his head what he will do and what he will say. He has a speech all planned. He will acknowledge his wrongdoing, that he has sinned, a sin perhaps of selfishness and also maybe cruelty, that he demands his inheritance from his father, indicating that his father is worth more to him dead than alive. We probably can't appreciate truly how powerfully the commandment to honor your mother and your father is present in this society. It meant that every adult child understood their duty to stay with older parents until the end of their lives. The younger son knows that he has all but relinquished the right to be called son. And so he won't ask for that privilege again. He will ask one of those well-fed hired hands Maybe he could be one of those. Now, as we learned in our Bible study last Monday, depending on where your allegiances between the two brothers lie, you might look at this speech as a statement of true contrition, that in coming to himself, this young man has realized that he has truly messed up, and that the right thing, the only thing for him to do, is to apologize and essentially throw himself at his father's mercy. On the other hand, if your allegiance might lie elsewhere, you might see the speech he's rehearsing as a really slick apology, hitting all the right notes that he knows his old man will fall for. The younger son sets off on his journey. And while he's still off, his father sees him, and he's filled with compassion, and he runs to him, and he throws his arms around him, and he kisses him. We have to at least consider the possibility that since the very day that this son left, that his father has been sitting somewhere on the property with a view of that road that he disappeared down. And that every day since his departure, his father has been waiting for exactly this moment. And so, in the minute that familiar, beloved form crests the horizon, the father goes out to him. When he reaches the boy, out comes the well-rehearsed speech. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father interrupts him, yelling orders at nearby slaves. "Get him out of these filthy clothes. Get him into a good robe. Put shoes on his poor feet. Get my mother's ring for his finger. Let us prepare a table before him in the presence of his enemies. Let us anoint his head with oil and see that his belly is full and his cup overflows. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And the party starts. There is no doubt in my mind that this parable is at least in part a story about forgiveness, about the grace we can offer one another when we are hurting through separation. But let it be heard here and now that this is first and foremost a story about the love and grace poured out upon us by a prodigal God, an outpouring that may well be considered extravagant or even wasteful, but which it is in the very nature of God to bestow upon us. Undeserving, deserving, everyone in between. No one is exempt. This is a story about a God who doesn't wait for us to come to our senses, but who seeks us out, who comes out to meet us and clothes us with grace before we've even had a chance to utter our apologies and our excuses. But oh, the older brother. This is hard for him. At the end of a long day of working in the field, heading back towards the house, he notices, goodness gracious, a party. There is music, there is dancing. He asks a slave what is going on and is told, "Your brother is home and your father's throwing this party because he's got him back, safe and sound." And the older brother is exasperated. He is angry. He feels something more complicated than this story really can unpack for us, but which I'm going to hazard a guess is a tower of resentment of his brother constructed over many years. Something recognizable to those who have always been the good ones, who've always done their duty as they understand it. He makes a decision, he's not going in. And so the minute the father realizes that his older, beloved child is outside, kept away by his own rage from the celebration, the father goes out to him. And he comes alongside his son and tries to get him to come in. But the older son has his own speech, not necessarily rehearsed, or maybe it is. And that old resentment comes out in painful detail. And you killed the fatted calf for him. His last pained words, you give him a feast. This is a story about forgiveness and grace. It might also be a story about how hard it can be to forgive. It might even be a story about the stories we tell ourselves so that we feel justified in saying, no, I will not go into the feast. Not for him, not for her. No. So, son, the father says, at last, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate. We had to rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found. There is no doubt in my mind that this is, at least in part, a story about forgiveness, about the grace we can offer one another, even when we are hurting. But it is first and foremost a story about a God who comes out to us with forgiveness and grace overflowing as this prodigal father goes to his lost and found boy, and also as this prodigal father goes out to his other boy, the one who has labored under the delusion that he had to earn his father's love from the beginning. This is where the story ends. One son reveling in the feast, dancing, filling himself with the bounty his father had to offer. And one son outside, not outside his father's love, not outside his father's forgiveness, but outside of the celebration because of a wall inside of him, not one his father has put up. We are invited. We are invited to the party of forgiveness and grace and love. Older sons and younger sons, dutiful do-gooders, and the ones who struggle to find their way. The categories of deserving and undeserving are meaningless at this party, because this is about a grace so enormous it needs to be poured out everywhere and for everyone. The invitation is an open one. The bounty poured out is for us. We are welcome. We are in. We are invited to pull up a chair to the table and to put on our dancing shoes and to revel in what God has in store for us. Thanks be to God. Amen.